So welcome everybody to the Keeping Up the Momentum event that we're throwing today, and it's really around representation and inclusion of South African women in business. So today, my name is Aura Mala. I work for Ndadza company. So to tell you a little bit more about the company was started in 2018, and it was really trying to understand diversity and inclusion issues within the different organizations and within industries. So I've been working for a number of years now, doing amazing work, but we've obviously seen there's different issues in terms of different organizations and different industries and different countries. And so one of the big things we wanted to do is actually have a think about how multinational organizations operate within different places, especially within the African continent, but specifically within South Africa as well. So today I am joined by the incredible Mashudu, and just to tell you a little bit about her, she's held various senior leadership positions with a notable history working on diverse sectors within IT, finance, freight and logistics, consulting, and many more, which has been incredible. She has a master's within business management from the University of Joburg and another post-grad diploma from UCT. And she's been doing some really incredible work within Standard Chartered Bank as within diversity and inclusion. And we're also joined by Samkelo, who is the MD of Mashudu Consulting and a D&I thought leader. So he's got extensive experience within people and organizational culture issues, and he's also a UCT grad. Oh, he is a UCT graduate, and it's really specialized within that kind of human resourcing piece as well. So thank you both for joining us today. Thank you so much. I wanted to kind of get started on the kind of first question and having a little bit of a deeper think as to what does actually inclusion look and feel like now in this current moment in time for women in South Africa. And Mashudu, if you could take the lead on that one, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Aura, and thank you for inviting me. Just a point of correction, Standard Chartered would love to have me, but I am with Standard Bank, not Standard Chartered, but thank you so much. I think just to start, awareness has started and there is traction and momentum. There is awareness that there is underrepresentation of women at C-suites and in executive positions. There is that analogy that of glass ceiling for women and overrepresentation at junior management, and to some extent at middle and middle level position, but not enough at decision-making position, right? We know that gender parity and pay parity is a reality, and it stems from historic and traditions. However, there is traction, though very slow. It's really, really slow. I mean, it's going to take us 200 years for us to actually reach that parity if we're doing that. But what does the future hold? Women are reclaiming their seat at the table. And I can say that in all aspects of society. There's an analogy that diversity is about invitation to the party. And I think most people that are within the diversity space, they know that. Inclusion is having a seat at the table, and equity is having a voice at the table, and belonging is being heard and being part of the decision making at the table. So future women leaders need to find those their voices. If not invited to the table, they need to find that table, and even those that are are not invited, or those that are invited, it should be on merit and capability. So it shouldn't be about, I'm just the cherry on the table, and maybe Samkelo sees that because Mashudu is with me from UCT, then let me just take Mashudu and invite her to the table. It should be on merit and capability, and their voices should never be quietened down. So if I'm invited to that table, I shouldn't just come and sit around the table and my voice be quietened down. So as per Madeleine Albright, I mean, I love her quote. It says, it took women a long time for women to develop a voice. Now that they have it, they should never be silent or be silenced.
I love that quote. That's a beautiful quote. Thank you so much. I really like that example. And Samkelo, the same question to you. From a male perspective, what do you think that inclusion should look and feel like for women in the future of South Africa?
Thanks, Mashudu. She's already laid it down, and I love the quote that she said, but also just defining the whole point around being invited and being allowed to dance at the table. Maybe I need to put a disclaimer in case the audience has not noticed. I'm a male. So this is not my area of strength. And I said this to you as well, Ramala. So it's important that when we navigate this journey, that we are aware that we come from different perspectives. My colleague used to work for an FMCG company. She puts it very well. She says, when we are fighting change and transformation, we both, me and you, Samkelo, we fight the race issue and we win that race battle. However, I, as a female, have another battle, another challenge, another issue of gender that I need to deal with. So I'm going to say some uncomfortable stuff about South Africa. Less than 3% of the women of the JSE listed companies are headed by women. And that's a fact. So we can say all this one. I know the whole story about Mandela being a great country, South Africa, transformation and great constitution. I subscribe to that. But for our daughters, for our sisters, and for our mothers, truth be told, there's still a lot to be done. There's still a lot to be done. And so we must be careful that we don't see women as this one monolithic or homogeneous group. Some women have made it, but for some single mothers, they have not made it. And there are some women who are either online with us or who will watch this video much more later, who are having uncomfortable experiences. And sadly enough, when the discourse rises around women, people want to talk to us about having a creche next to the place of work. We're asking for more than that. People want to talk to us about maternity leave. I think our sisters are asking for more than a discussion on maternity leave. I think they are asking, what are the chances of me becoming a CEO, a head of IT, a head of talent in this organization? What if I want to work 2 days a week and the rest of the time look after my children? Also, they are saying, can we please change the jokes and the discourses that Samkelo and his friends make in the boardroom? And please, can we please be measured by the same yardstick that's used to Samkelo and his friends? Because when Samkelo makes a mistake, it's okay, he can get better. But I as a woman, I as a lady, I have to work extra hard. So my picture, my view says there's still a lot that still needs to be done. I agree, great constitution, great democracy, but in corporate, there's still a lot of work, especially when it comes to our sisters, our daughters, and our mothers, mostly those who are also disabled as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely agree. I think there's so much to be thinking of in that, and it kind of guides me onto the next kind of piece I wanted to touch on in terms of what kind of nuances have you seen amongst Black women within senior leadership throughout your careers? And that comes to both of you, but I'll go to you first, Mashudu.
Or they come in all shapes and shades and sizes and all kinds, and I think Samkelo, you've touched on it. As a woman, as a mother, I mean, I'm a mother of 3 boys, beautiful boys, and that career has never been easy, to be quite honest. And to be where I am today is because there were some career angels within my career. And the sad part is, when I look at the career angels that have been there within my career, if I put my fingers like this, none of them were female within that career, if I count those career angels. And so I look at women if I look at those women, I say there are those that are career angels, and then I look at some that I call them igniters. And why I call them igniters is because, they have that sense of bringing you down and crushing you to a point where you even believe yourself that I'm not worthy of what I have. I'm not worthy of the capabilities that I have to do what I'm capable to do. And sometimes it's a reflection on themselves, but it takes a while to actually realize that within your career, that actually it's not me, it's this individual. you talk about bullying, you think about bullying at school and bullying for children. There's such a big bullying within corporate, and maybe they want to be on top alone, and we usually say it's cold at the top when you're at the top alone. But some, they want to be there by themselves, and they're happy to be there by themselves. They even change how they speak. They even change how they sit. They even change, and some of them become, the guys. They become part of the boys, and and some even. So I knew you as Mashudu from Varsity, and now you've changed. You now call yourself something else, and then when I approach you, because I'm thinking, it's part of mentorship. It's part of that career angel for me to step up. Not that I want to take over what you have, but it's about networking. Ora, it becomes a problem. But then approach a man, it's like, yeah, sure. And I say, Samkelo, I just want to learn. I just want to understand what is it that you do, and what is diversity, what is inclusion. I'm interested in this. I come from an HCBP background. I was an HCBP all my life, and then there was this fascination with transformation, with diversity and inclusion, and I wanted to learn more. And there were those career angels that were opening up for me to say, yeah, Mashudu, you can learn more about this and come, this is a very interesting aspect. But within human capital, when you say, can I learn about this? It's like, no, I don't have time. And really, it's amazing, because it's something that you can actually carry somebody within the wings and teach those people. There's nothing so amazing than looking at a product that you can say, they were my protege, and look at them flying today. You go to an interview, and all you want is a position. It's for you to grow within that position. And already they've judged you. They've judged you that maybe you're not thin enough, you're not fat enough. I can't wear heels. And it's like, I'm not wearing the right heels. Even if I'm wearing the right heels, they're not red top, red bottoms. I can't wear red bottoms. I'm not wearing the right jacket. My hair is not long enough. We judge each other as women. We're not supportive of each other enough. So those are the shades of kind of nuances that you find within leadership.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's something that we kind of touched on when we had the conversation earlier. I think what it seems to be is this kind of tokenistic culture that's happened. It's that they've made it through into the kind of boys club in terms of executive or senior leadership. And now they're gatekeepers. They're working as gatekeepers, not letting other people in, not supporting one another, because there seems to be a culture at the top. There seems to be a culture that they clearly had to struggle on through. And I love that you kind of specified that piece around bullying, because it is very much that there's so much corporate bullying and we're not really pointing it out enough. And yes, we may have these policies around discrimination and various pieces within, within cultures and within different companies, but there is a level of bullying and tokenism that's taking place here. And that is very much a cultural issue. I'm keen to find out from you, Samkelo, because obviously you work for a consultancy, you have your own consultancy. How does the kind of culture fit into these kind of nuances that Mashudu has described just now?
Yeah, so I also agree with Mashudu. And Mashudu, if it's any confirmation to that I'm supposed to be doing this, I also can confirm that I'm not able to wear high heels as well. I just want to put it out there. Just want to confirm that as not that I'm expected to, but I thought let's just build some support here as well. When we speak of culture, can we please make two distinctions of culture? There's culture that the human beings have, whether those people are English or Afrikaners or Venda or Sothos. Let us not forget that corporates have got their own culture. But even corporate culture can be subdivided into two: the formal, structured culture, which sits in the manual that tells us that every twice a year, you'll have a performance review. So that is the known culture. But the most powerful culture is the informal culture. And that is the culture that makes the decisions. That is the culture when people start discussing things offline on WhatsApp group, and then they choose who's going to be the next appointed person. That's a company culture as well. So there's formal culture, there's also informal. And now we are seeing that when we do job interviews and the candidate leaves, the kind of comments that get made after the interview are the ones that decide if he or she is going to get the job or not. And sometimes they make statements like, I kind of like him. Interesting, his daughter went to the same school as my daughter. Interesting enough, he also was a top hockey player as well. Those might come across as subtle discussions, but they weigh heavily on choosing the talent, on promoting the person as well. So because of our country tends to be seen in terms of culture vendors on and sutus, we accept that culture. But for me, my biggest concern is the company culture. Has company culture kept up with diversity and inclusion? Are our processes and systems aligned with diversity and inclusion? I'll make for you the most simplest example. When you join an organization, they say you are starting on the 1st. And the only time they show you your documents on medical aid and on pension fund is on the 1st of the month. That data could have been sent to you even before you joined the organization. But now you are coming in as part of, they use a term called onboarding and induction. They are saying that this is the medical aid plan. You must choose the thing. I'm spending 4 hours choosing what plan that I must be on. And also they ask listen to this famous word, will your wife also be part of the plan? Look at the assumption that Samkelo has got a wife. What if I'm not heterosexual? So can you see, so for me, when you speak of culture, it's the language, it's the belief, it's the processes, it's the system. Has corporate culture kept up with diversity and inclusion? In some instances, it has. There are leaders who are doing that. I was listening to a nice interview last week done by the CEO of the Bidvest Group, an African female. And you could see her weaving into that. You could see what she brings into the role. And she says, we are really aggressive on working on transformation and empowerment, but also you could see that her heart was into it. But some organizations, they have not moved an inch in that area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I really appreciate that. And I love that you kind of differentiated the various differences between kind of formal culture within a corporate organization and that kind of informal piece as well. I wanted to kind of touch on something that you mentioned there, and in terms of cultural traditions and have they got any influence within the boardroom and what impact do they actually have? Because I only asked this because I was also watching, I think it was a TED talk from somebody who is a South African woman, and she was talking about how her as somebody with a long career who deserves to be at the boardroom, who has obviously worked hard to have her seat at the boardroom, has been called disrespectful by her elders within that boardroom because, you know, now there's a cultural issue. Now there's how dare you address me like that? I am your elder, because of the cultural traditions there. So I'm keen to find out from you guys, how much influence does cultural tradition have, and how much should, you know, diversity and inclusion consultancies like in Diverse and obviously Samkelo's firm, but also within corporates as well, HR people, how much should we be including that or thinking about that in the kind of policies and the things that we're working with as well?
Yeah, can I start and tackle that one? First of all, I think I once said to a colleague of mine who's a white South African, is a head of IT executive, and also Mashudu, I was also an executive as well. I said to him, our experiences in this organization, even though we are both executives, are not the same. And he was shocked. So when it comes to culture, the culture that people bring at work, I think beyond just being aware that so-and-so is a Zulu or Sotho or Venda, we've really not taken time to understand the kind of belief systems that people bring, the kind of understandings and the kind of worldview that people bring into the world of work. So we just have an understanding that, okay, no, he or she belongs into the Muslim culture or to the Indian culture, but what kind of beliefs or what ways was he or she raised that inform how he or she makes decisions in 2021 as a leader, as a manager. The scary part is the Samkelos of this world who are educated, who are thought to be thought leaders on diversity and inclusion, is when they want to use culture to justify a practice, a treatment that is incongruent with diversity and inclusion. When I use words like, how dare you address me like that? That's power. That's what Mashudu calls bullying on steroids. So clever and smart as I am, I'm now using culture to perpetuate a belief, to deny access, to limit a conversation and a discussion. That for me is a scary part. And you do say, and I use myself as an example because it took a while for me to make a distinction between how I was managed and how I will become a leader going forward. And it takes a great deal of introspection and awareness to understand that, shucks, there are elements of your culture that are limiting to women. There are elements of your culture that are not open to discussion and debate. But also, Samkelo, with all due respect, culture is not static. My daughters are 11 and 16. They are asking me questions now that I would never ask. Like my 5-year-old, when we went to an ATM machine when she was 5-year-old, she said, Daddy, what is that? Can I also press the machine so that we can get the money? We've never, Mashudu, we've never had those experiences. We never discuss money with our parents. So culture is not static, culture evolves. And sometimes corporate does not fully understand culture beyond his vendor, his Sutu, his Nguni, he's from Limpopo. It just ends there. You know? That's all on my side for under culture.
Brilliant, thank you.
I mean, Ora, we always say that people should come as authentic selves. We throw it out there. And then you hear, and I think Samkelo, you touched on this, that after the interviews, they're like, I think Mashudu doesn't meet the culture. Whose culture are we talking about? Is it Samkelo's culture? Is it Ora's culture? Is it Mashudu's culture? Is it the organization's culture? Whose culture are we talking about that we're saying they don't meet? And in that, we throw in the biases based on the panel that is there. So when we speak about the culture within the boardrooms, there's always bias that goes in it. And it depends who's sitting around the table, because whoever that the house belongs to, I always say, within the organization, there's the owner of the house. There's always a face. There will always be a race, a gender, a sexual orientation. For that, you can create a house and a personality for that boardroom. So who is that boardroom belonging to? And whoever that owns that boardroom, it will be that person's culture. So there will always be a stereotype to it. And I think, Samkelo, you touched on it. So should we stick to those cultural traditions? Hell no, because then we'll be reverting back, to historical norms where, as an example, women do not have a seat. As much as I am Mashudu as I am, I carry a whole lot more. Also, Samkelo carries a whole lot more. I am Mashudu. I'm black. I'm female. I'm Venda. I come from Makado. When I do my trainings, I always make them laugh. I say to them, before I can say this words that are coming out to you, there's a whole lot that is happening in my head, because I have to, translate Venda, Sepedi into Venda and then into English. And then you get this lovely words that are coming out. And then by the time I'm done, I'm so tired after this, because it's like, there's a whole lot of conversion that is happening. So we'll be reverting back to that if we keep that culture. But I think if we create that diversity and understand that there is a variety that is happening within this house, because we understand that somebody owns this house or owns this boardroom, and acknowledge the variety that exists within that boardroom. And then within that variety, create then that inclusion of everyone. We understand that everybody has to come as their authentic self. I can come as Mashudu. I am a healer. I come from Makado. I come with my Vendaness and the English that sometimes the words, they don't come right. Surprising enough, and Samkelo, you would agree with me, somebody who is Afrikaans, they can come with a broken English and will be like, we will never laugh. Mara, hey, Mashudu, let her break it English. They'll be very quick to say, no, it's actually not that. The word is X. Or somebody who is German, they would have a broken English. You'd be like, Marashem, he's not English. But let me break it. Hey, a South African, an African person who is Zulu, the English is not their mother tongue, they'll be like, Mashudu, it's not that word, it's X. So let us be empathetic to each other and understand that, it's a new cultural norm within the boardroom. And then there's a culture of diversity, of inclusion, of belonging, where people are treated and respected for their authentic self. They're valued for who they are. They can have a level of supportive energy and commitment from others so that they can do their best, without feeling judged. And we can have that trust. We can have that psychological safety that I can be me. It should be a culture where they feel interconnected because of their similarities, and they can value it because of their differences rather than or in spite of them. And that, for me, is a culture that I can say it is real, it is authentic, and it doesn't belong to anyone.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I loved that you touched on that piece there about the variety and the differences between us, because I think it's so interesting that as a country, as South Africans, obviously we boast that we're this rainbow nation that's so inclusive of everybody. And we're one of the few countries that has got inclusion written into our constitution, like very much there. It's present, it's beautiful, but it's incredible that within this kind of corporate space, it's the new frontier where we are clearly not doing everything that we're doing within our society. We're not representing all of the people from various different ethnicities. And there's so many ethnicities within our country and within our countries as well. And I think we kind of have to think and reflect back onto the kind of corporate organizations that are within South Africa, and not just within South Africa, but within the African continent as well. Because I think what happens is huge corporations have offices within African continents and don't think about the nuances of the variety of ethnicities that are in this country. I mean, for South Africans, I think we have maybe 13 to 24 ethnicities living within our nation, but there are other countries within Africa with hundreds and hundreds of ethnicities, and we're not thinking about those nuances enough. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. And I think, Mashudu, the way that you described it is absolutely brilliant as well. So thank you for that. I wanted to kind of move on a little bit and kind of think about that kind of piece around gender specifically. So we've touched on a little bit here around how executive leadership is very much seen as a boys' club. But I really want to ask the two of you, how much influence is education having on where women are being employed within the country as well, within organizations? Like where is the connection between education and corporations as well? And how can we meld this to have the future that we want to? It's a big question, but I'll go to you first, Samkelo.
Okay, I think when we speak about education in South Africa, we must understand the context of education in this country. So we still value metric as though it's the be it all and it all. And that not everyone finishes metric. And also the schooling system, our government gives us stats that there are people who attend school but only sit in a day, will only get 3 hours of learning in a day. So if we are assuming that because I'm educated, then I'll become an executive, let's just also look at the start, at the basic. How is our education system, where you still have schools that don't have toilets, where you still have schools where there's no maths or physics teacher? Because in 20 years' time, by the time corporate says I'm looking for an SQL administrator or I'm looking for a data analyst, it's just that person didn't receive that understanding 20 years ago when he or she was in Limpopo or in Umlazi or in Ngobo. So when you say education, you must understand that actually the foundation, the root of the education is not proper. And sadly, it's in 2021. If you look at the metric results, we say so many have passed, but if you do the analysis of those who've passed, who've done maths and science, and even of those who've done maths and science, how many of them are Black women? The stats is shocking. And then you go to university, pick up a company called Dell, who funds people who study at university, or NSF, who funds people who study at university. You track the learners who've been to NSF. How many of those who've done NSF have either in their first year, passed in their first year, and how many of them have had to repeat? So by the time we see corporate, there's been a lot of events in primary school, in high school, in tertiary. Okay, fine, I've got my BCom now, I've majored in accounting, I'm a female, I enter corporate. Now I major Samkelo. Now Samkelo does not see me as a young graduate to mentor and tutor and develop. He sees other things. He expects other things from me. He makes my life hell. These are realities for some women in corporate. And we wonder why then we don't see that trickle up effects of people progressing and making it. So yes, we have an education, we've got universities, I accept that, but we still have a lot of challenges when we look at the stats in terms of the quality of the education, and also how many people know what is an actuary, what is a CA, what is an agronomist, what is STEM. So there are young girls growing up in a rural area who've got no idea what STEM is. So for me, when people say education, I say, let's just be careful. What education do we mean again? And who's got the education? Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I think that's very clear. And I think, the education issues within the country in itself, I think you outlined them beautifully as well. And then on your last point there, in terms of like how much has education actually been taught in terms of what is out there for the corporate world? I think that's something that's not just specific for South Africa. It's definitely something that happens in various countries where there's a huge divide between business and education, and we're not told in our education the various careers that we can take on. We're not even educated about where we can go. You graduate with a maths or science degree, and there are so many different careers that you can take there, but nobody's telling you, nobody's doing that. And I think one of the pieces I wanted to touch on here is that clearly the corporations generally are not doing enough to actually outreach to those educated people or people who are getting educated and actually telling them about their options, because at the end of the day, that's what freedom should be. It should be, the ability to choose, but also the ability to choose high quality choices, a variety of choices. And we're not giving people enough choices as corporations as well. But that's my little piece. Mashudu, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Ora, you would think that with so many years now into democracy, things would be different. There would have been changes that have happened, and our schooling system would have gotten better. But we're not here. We're not there yet. And I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots, it's even widening even more. And with the pandemic, it's even worse. And I think it was very clear even last year with the results of the matrics, you could see that. And then you have that gap of the haves and the have-nots, and then you still have those children that are in the urban and those that are in the rural areas, and it's even worse. Samkelo touched on it to say, they're those kids that are attending school under trees and they don't have pit toilets and all that. I mean, if I give an example, for me, the first time I saw a computer was when I got into university, and I had to type a 50-page essay, and I had to type with like one finger. But and those were many years ago. And there are still children that are like that will still have to go to university if they're lucky, if they make it in matric, and maybe they get sponsorship and they go to university. And should they make it, then, they would succeed. But then you still have that discrimination. Let's say they make it, they come from those rural, and even in the poorest of the poorest, they make it and they go to university. There's still that discrimination when it comes to universities as well, because some of the corporations, they look at the well-known universities. There'll be those universities that some of the children go to, and when you look at CVs, it's like, what? University of Limpopo? I don't think this person is suitable. It's about the person's capability. It's not about the university that they go to. And you look at your UCTs and your Verties and, your Pretoria and whatever, and your UJs. And what about those other universities? Would we ever solve this gap? Yes, we can look at the STEMs and the sciences and all that, and there's still more boys that follow the sciences and girls maybe not introduced enough into those kind of subjects, and it should start from grassroots. But then we should also look at the inequalities that are there. There's no teachers if you look at the rural areas. Some, they don't even go to school, and some they give up even so quickly. Some they qualify, and after they qualify, they don't find employment, and then they end up being on the streets. And that's why you see all these things that are happening and the fights and the lootings and all that. And I'm not saying it's happening, the lootings are happening because the children are, but it is the manifestation of what is happening currently in the country, and we cannot shy away from it to say there is a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be looked at.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think it is a problem that we all should be looking at, and it's something that, you know, obviously our government should be looking at, but also something that corporations can definitely have a contribution to. And I think we should all be doing a lot more. And as you mentioned there, I think it's really important that you pointed that out, how much the haves and the have-nots, and how that gap between inequality is widening even more now ever since the pandemic, and it's getting worse. And we as leaders within this kind of space have to do something and say something and make sure that the conversation is being had. So it's good to see as well. I wanted to kind of take us on to our kind of last question, this kind of last point, which is a little bit, you know, darker, but really important to have a conversation on. And it's really about how or can or should corporations actually help tackle the current problem of the South African femicide. So I obviously sent you all this kind of question. I'd love to go to you first, Mashudu, and hear your thoughts on that.
Oh, that is the biggest one, and you know, our country, I mean, is counted one of the top ones up there when it comes to the stats, and when you think about what happened with the pandemic, it even got worse because we started having people working from home, people started getting to knowing their spouses and their partners even better, because we used to, you know, kind of see you in the evening when I come home and spend shorter time, and then I go to work. But now with the lockdowns and stuff, people started spending more time at work, and that's when, you know, GBV became even bigger. But what I also brought up was, you know, sometimes we look at femicide and think that it only happens in the homes, and the most important aspect of it is we sometimes overlook, and I mentioned bullying, but it also, you know, the harassment and what happens in organizations, because there is also harassment and bullying and whatever violence that happens within the organizations. And I think it's one important aspect to ensure that we have proper policies in place to guard against harassment. That is one important one that we sometimes overlook. We think that as organizations, it's not our problem. It's something that happens in the home, so why should we get involved? There need to be, harassment is important, and we need to look at that. There's a lot of movements that are out there. I mean, South Africa, there's a hashtag this, hashtag that, all the time, you know, not in my name, men against violence and all that. But it's about revisiting, maybe as organizations, to come together and revisit and check how effective those are, because it impacts our own staff. It impacts our own people that are working for us. And if we don't have those staff, then, you know, how are we going to grow our bottom line? If you look at that, who's going to grow our businesses if you think about it? It's also about starting conversations from a younger age. You know, look at what narrative we're sharing with our younger girls and boys, and what are we grooming them to be? Because that thing of saying girls should wear pink and boys should wear boys wear blue. Yeah, girls wear pink, boys wear blue, and then girls should play with kitchen stuff, and then boys can kick a ball and da-da-da-da-da-da. And then we kind of manifesting this thing of negative masculinity as well. And we infest that from a younger age. What are we saying? And how are we then kind of creating this narrative? And in South Africa, it's huge, although we hide it. And when you go into the regions, it's even higher, that if you have a child that says I'm LGBT, then you hide them. It's like, that should never happen. You should never talk about that. It's sin. You take them to church. They must be prayed for. I mean, what is that? What kind of narrative are you passing out there? And then also, when you talk about masculinity, it's not only masculinity looking at it from a man's point of view, because sometimes this harassment or this, it also happens in same sexuality, and we need to look at that and be real about it. So it's about having enough conversations as well, having critical conversations within our organization as well about GBV. And sometimes we look at this subject that is deemed to be too sensitive. We shouldn't talk about it, but it's about whether we call our men and start having barbershop sessions, let our men start talking and say, what is masculinity? What and women and say, if I am in this kind of situation, how do I reach out? How do I find support? And then also with organizations, we need to put together some support mechanisms as well for those that are victims of violence. Who can they call for support? Have confidential helplines that they can support. If you have human capital out there, if somebody comes to you, don't judge, because sometimes we look at people and we judge them. Take time to sit and listen and support that person.
Thanks, Mashudu. You've touched on how society rears and grows people. You've also touched on what happens in corporate. I have this belief that the accountant we see in the office, the IT desk technician we see, the CFO we see, the head of engineering was once a child. He or she once grew up in a suburb, in a township, and in a village. So he or she was raised in a particular way. When we see them, the behaviors, what we see playing out in a corporate boardroom or in the canteen, this is before COVID, of course, has had years of rearing and being put in. So now the question is, how do we create societies, like Mashudu was saying, this thing of masculinity, where we help people to understand that it's not about being blue and pink, and I like the fact that you've raised around, you spoke about it also, Ora, yesterday, around intersectionality as well, how women relate. Mashudu, earlier on, you referred to the pull-head Down syndrome as well, So for me, I think it's important that we first look at society, but also we need corporates. We encourage corporates, because we ever need corporates to look at safety and health. We need corporates to look at sustainability. So maybe we encourage corporates also to have the uncomfortable discussions around what's happening in society. Because when I come to work, I always say, when I come to work, I bring my full self. I don't bring just 10% of myself at work, and I'm a result of the society. When we talk about the looting that happened in South Africa, some people lost their family members in the looting. Yes, others had staff stock, but some people lost a family member through the looting. There's someone in a family in Sebokeng right now, in Lenasia, in Ndadza, in Gqeberha, who does not have a job because there's been a looting. There's an income that's not coming, and somebody's having to work extra to support a family because somebody doesn't have a job of a pharmacist assistant as well. So to your point then, let's look at society, but also can corporate also be influenced to attend to some of these challenges?
I think both of you made such incredible points, but I think I wanted to just follow up on the terms of what kind of support we can give, because I loved the fact that, Mashudu, you obviously mentioned there that there should be more support. The fact that ever since the lockdown and ever since 2020, GBV has heightened massively because of that. But also it's a matter of, the femicide isn't something that only happens within the home. It's something that very much happens within the organizations. And I think what's really important about this conversation is that we should put the onus onto so many corporates that come to our country without thinking about the nuances of that country and think that one D&I strategy will fit all countries when that clearly isn't the case. Clearly, there's a specific problem in South Africa when it comes to this femicide, and what kind of policies should be implemented that we can support one another specifically for this kind of context as well. And obviously you mentioned there, Mashudu, that you kind of thought that there should be various pieces of support. Is there anything that, you've kind of thought about previously, or something that you can kind of think of as well, kind of open to both of you there as well? In terms of what, yeah.
I think, Aura, look at your employees in a holistic manner.
Mm-hmm.
Don't look at a person in one form and say, I can support Samkelo this way, but cannot support them this way, because we come holistically. And I mean, even with all the policies that you put together, they should be holistic. It should be a holistic view. So whether it's in an employee well-being, it's your leave policies, and now with people working from home, you need to make sure that if somebody says, I need leave because of my family members are X, Y, and Z, it should be more supportive of that person than to say, actually, it's not part of policy and we don't know what to do because we never arrange for this. It's a holistic view of an employee. And if you look at an employee in a holistic manner, then I think, corporations will be able to succeed in that. One major one that most of the organizations, they tend to overlook is sexual harassment, because they think it's out there. It can never happen to us. We'll deal with it when it happens. And also train your leaders and train your human capital and also your employees. Make it a compliance training if you need to, so that your people can understand what goes into what is sexual harassment to start with, and what are the measures that can be taken when you are in that situation, and what kind of support can be provided, and what kind of confidentiality you would provide for those people. I found that most of the organization, it happens, and it happens in silence. And you find most people then saying, then I'd rather leave because this is happening to me. And in most cases, you find that it's actually leaders that are sexually harassing their employees. And if it's my leader, then who am I to actually speak up? So let's look at it in a holistic view of an employee. And that way, and incorporate it in everything. You incorporate it in recruitment, you incorporate it in leave. In everything that you do within the whole life cycle of an employee, make sure that you put this in, because it is a problem that we have.
I couldn't agree more. Most of the time when companies approach us for intervention or assistance on diversity and inclusion, they always say, help us to be more inclusive, to be more diverse. I always like to say, can we please take a step back and say, what are the practices and the behaviors in our organization that are excluding? Before we rush to fix and create an inclusive organization, can we look at an organization and step aside and say, how is our language, processes, and systems excluding of females, of millennials, of people who are gay and lesbian? And it's always amazing when they say, no, let's start there. Before we rush to the solution and design high-part strategy, how do we treat one another in meetings? I'm going to give a very funny example. Now and again, I'm forced to get into an aeroplane. It's a Boeing in South Africa. Do you know that every time I get into an aeroplane, when the pilot starts talking, to this day, he or she still speaks to us as passengers only in English and Afrikaans. He will tell us that he's now commences descent for our Tambo Airport. He's landing in runway A4, but there's never a Xhosa translation of that. There's never a vendor. And whenever I've tried to have the discussion, I've been told how that cannot work. I'm just using a simple example in a country that is diverse, Rainbow Nation, Heritage September. People still get in an aeroplane, are still addressed in a language that they cannot understand. And it has become, and it's almost like certain things that are abnormal, we've made them normal. And nobody's saying, hang on, that is nie reg nie. They don't understand this language. We are an airline. Let's use analytics or speech analytics to try and speak to them in their language. So for me, you ask, what other things can we do? Let's look at what are we doing that is exclusionary. And also let's look at the metrics as well. I'm a big fan on measuring progress in diversity and inclusion. Not to say great intervention, great workshops. What was the shift? What was the change?
In sign language, I mean, one simple thing. What if I can hear?
Yes.
They're blabbing, and I'm like, oh, maybe they're gonna soon. There'll be sign languaging for me, and there's no sign language. And we do that in organizations as well. We keep on doing training. We're sitting here, or we're busy speaking, and somebody maybe that cannot hear. They're actually just looking at us. Maybe they can lip read, but they actually cannot hear what we're saying.
Completely agree. It's very true. I just wanted to go to a couple of questions from our participants. So Joanna asks, thank you for sharing this, Samkelo. I'm interested to know, is that the type of behavior that's called out by others, or is it accepted behavior Do you know when it happens, but do they stay silent? So I think she's referring to when we were talking about the kind of boys' club piece around various traditions, how people are treating other people because of cultural traditions. Like, how is it a blocker around that?
There are instances where it's still hugely happening, and there are places where people still call it out. But also another thing that I'm not comfortable with, there's also silence. So I say, and I do something that is very unfair, or I treat a lady unfairly because I'm an executive, I CEO, people are silent. This silence when something goes wrong, this silence when an email is toxic, this silence when someone is a bully at work, because it's not happening to me, let me keep silent. That's not how we're raised up. It's like, if it happens to Aura or to Mashudu, it's also happening to me as well. But there's this silent in corporate, and when people leave, then they write, no, I could not speak about it when I was working over there. So now that you've left, just keep quiet then. Because when you were in that organization, you were quiet. Don't now suddenly become the Mother Teresa, the Pope John Paul of speaking out or light. You were in that organization. You gave us an image that all was well. You can't now, when you've left, come and tell us that how challenging it was. And no, sorry, we believed you. When the system benefited you, when the system was convenient for you, you were quiet.
Exactly, I agree.
I think also, Ora, it talks to, and Samkelo, it talks to organization creating psychological safety, because you'd hear most people saying, that is career limiting, and that happens everywhere. You speak up, and I mean, organizations do surveys all the time, and when you look at the results, it's always fear to speak up. And then we throw these things of psychological safety all the time, but are we really creating that? And do we really craft it in a way that our people understand what psychological safety means? And do we lead by example if we are leaders, and make sure that we create that trust, we create that psychological safety that they can speak up? Or do we just say it as part of, strategy, to say as a D&I strategy, we're creating psychological safety, and you can speak up and so that we look good on paper. Some policies are very good on paper, but in practice they're not actually there. So I think as leaders we need to create that psychological safety and make sure that as leaders we can actually be we can lead by example, and we can open up for people. We can allow them to speak up and ask those not direct questions to say, so Samkelo, what do you mean? What is it that you want to talk about? Because already then I'm closing that person up to say, I think this is not a safe space. Yeah. We need to create that safe space and make sure that they can speak up. And they can then be able to call it out. If there's any action or any kind of derogatory remarks, they'll be able to then call it out. Then that thing of, or this kind of saying, we'll take it offline. Why are you taking it offline? Why can't we speak around? We are around the table. Why is it offline? Then offline already is a boys' club discussion. It means, why should I bother?
I couldn't agree more. Oh, good. And so I have another question here. I think it was around this kind of piece around the femicide. So is there anything that individuals, people could do to create change in this area? So maybe within organizations or also within their own personal lives. Does anybody have any thoughts?
I think it's about speaking up, Ora. Everybody, it's not about one size fit all. It's not about everyone's story being the same. Experiences are different, and situations are different. But if we create platforms and if we create avenues where people would find safety and would find places that they can speak up, and if I were to speak to women out there, even men, but mainly sisters, if we can be there for each other. If we can be each sister's keeper, if we can be there to help fix each other's crown, there's nothing better like fixing each other's crown. If we can be there as each other's is each other's angel, whether career, whether emotional, but be there to support each other. If you bring somebody down, you're bringing yourself down. Be selfless. By being selfless, you're not being selfish at the end of the day, but you're being there to support one another. And if one succeed, we all succeed.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mashudu. And then on my side, femicide is not an employee wellness issue. Femicide is not an employee wellness issue. I intentionally, deliberately repeat it because in corporate, we like to put things in boxes. In our houses, we've got wardrobes and we've got shelves for T-shirts, shelves for jerseys. In corporates, we've also got shelves for finance, shelves for HR. And even with HR, we've got shelves for employee wellness, shelves for leadership, and shelves for OD and culture. Femicide, as Mashudu was saying, affects all of us. It's not an employee wellness issue. One of the saddest things about COVID and the pandemic is that we are now dying behind the screen of Google, MS Teams, and Zoom because we don't see each other in the canteen. Because I cannot come and walk into your office and say, how are you doing, Samkelo? We are now dying in silence now. And we are all being told that we must cope and things like that. That's the saddest thing about the COVID is that people are dying and we can't even attend funerals. Hence, I say femicide is not an employee wellness issue where we bring in iCares and we report every month how many people went to iCares, what are the high-level themes, there were issues around relationships or family. It affects all of us. And thanks, Mashudu, for saying also the men as well. Because the Samkelos of this world can speak so nicely on the screen, but how are they treating their wives?
Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for coming to our event today. I really appreciate your